of a disastrous upward jump in global temperatures, rising sea levels, Arctic meltings, forest fires, hurricanes, acid seas, dying plants and animals, every climate-related disaster that a federal research grant can conjure up, we're hearing about, because that's how they get their government grants. That's how they qualify. Professional figures in white coats with authoritative tones of voice and lots of credentials repeatedly dismissed specific criticism of what they were proposing by claiming that their so-called scientific findings had been peer-reviewed, verified by other scientists. Rather than honestly discussing the issues that were being raised, they portrayed themselves as beyond reproach. They've been peer-reviewed, so why even discuss any specific criticism? Just dismiss it. They gave each other prizes as they selectively handed out research grants. Those who disagreed, no matter how prominent, were treated like non-entities, like they didn't exist, or they were personally disparaged, labeled deniers, like Holocaust deniers. How much uglier can you get? But such tactics won't work forever. It's clear their steamroller operation is beginning to fall apart. We know that because we hear scientists who have been clamoring for subservient acceptance of their theory of man-made global warming. We now can find out, and we now understand that those very same scientists, they themselves were making a sham out of scientific methodology and were indeed repressing dissent and destroying peer review. I'm speaking, of course, about over 1,000 emails and 3,000 other documents that were purloined from one of the foremost global warming research institutes in the world, the Climate Research Institute at East Anglia University in the United Kingdom. Let me acknowledge, yes, a hacker or possibly a whistleblower may have been responsible for making this information public. But contrary to the fanatic attempt to distract attention away from the clear wrongdoing and arrogance that was exposed in these communications, contrary to that, how those documents were obtained is not what's relevant. It's the truth of these emails that count, not how the information was obtained. What do these formerly private and now exposed communications say? One email is from Kevin Trenberth, head of the Climate and Analysis section at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. In it, he describes his utter frustration with studies that reach conclusions contrary to his clique's predictions of a looming global warming disaster. Even more frustrating, the temperatures being recorded, contrary to his August observations and predictions, contrary to them, things were getting colder, much colder than usual. And here, folks, is the clincher. Trenberth laments in this email, in this formerly secret communication, the fact is, we can't account for the lack of warming at the moment, and it is a travesty that we can't, end of quote. Rather than reconsidering his position, he is complaining he can't find a cover thick enough to hide his errors. So what do you do if those gosh darn numbers show that there's no warming? Well, you fudge the numbers, of course. There is a 1999 email from Phil Jones, the center's director, talking about a, quote, trick, end of quote, in the presentation of data intended to, quote, hide the decline, end of quote. What does decline mean when he says hide the decline? A decline in global temperatures, of course. These people who are touting global warming are talking about hiding the decline in temperatures, what would prove that there is no global warming going on at this time. To those who have followed this issue closely, this is nothing new. We have seen it before. There was a famous graph produced by Michael Mann, one of the most prominent global warming advocates. His famous graph as well as his highly touted lectures, deleted the existence of a warming period in the Middle Ages and the 500-year decline in the Earth's temperature, which ended in about 1850, known as the Little Ice Age. Those very real temperature cycles were left out of his graphs. And many of the newly revealed emails detail that this was intentional deception. Mann's graph indicated centuries-long stability instead of two distinct climate cycles going up and down. And then, after presenting a graph that just had centuries-long stability, then we were shown a jump in temperature that looked like a hockey stick, the end of the hockey stick. Stability and then a big jump forward. That graph was a fake, and the jump in temperature he predicted didn't happen. So now the climate elite has simply deleted the hockey stick graph from their presentation, even though it was a distinct part of their presentation for years, just as man had deleted the preceding warming and cooling cycles when he analyzed modern temperature trends and put them into his graph. As more honest and level-headed scientists from around the world raised serious questions, well-funded global warming alarmists were hard-pressed to answer critics. So, what is a true believer to do when you hear criticism? Well, shut up the opposition, of course. No, don't consider what the opposition is saying. Don't try to have an honest dialogue. No, shut them up. Here's Phil Jones again, this time about censoring criticism. I can't see either of these papers being in the next IPCC report. Let's just stop right there. So here he is trying to leave out of the IPCC report papers that were contrary in view. Yet they tout over and over again that the IPCC is the basis for their credibility. It's all the time talking about the IPCC report. Yet here we have a quote talking about how they're trying to censor what goes into that report. Quoting further, Kevin and I will keep them out, even if we, meaning this information out of the IPCC report, even if we have to, and I quote, redefine what the peer review literature is. And these are the same people who were proclaiming that their credibility came from the IPCC and peer-reviewed research. Well, let's look what happened next, when an editor of an academic journal does not buckle under this kind of pressure and actually publishes the work of a skeptical scientist. Here's what Jones says. And I quote, I will be emailing the journal to tell them I'm having nothing more to do with it until they rid themselves of this troublesome editor. End of quote. This guy is conspiring to get the editor of a research publication fired, and what was it for? For publishing a contrary view. Is this science? These emails are filled not with answering critics, but with the effort to stifle the right to question what these people were advocating. Significantly, man-made global warming alarmists have continually countered criticism by arrogantly dismissing tangible questions and asserting that peer reviews back them up. Well, now we can see the evidence that these self-righteous snobs who saw themselves as above criticism were manipulating, if not destroying, the peer review process, so no one with other points of view could actually participate. Get that? They say, you can't question our material because ours has been peer reviewed and your criticisms haven't, but they themselves were undermining the ability of those critics to have their criticisms published in a peer-reviewed publication. Have they no shame? Oh, but there's more than this. Jones again, this time to Professor Michael Mann of Pennsylvania State University, the same guy with the phony hockey stick graph, is talking about hiding information from critics. If they ever hear there is a Freedom of Information Act now in the UK, I think I'll delete the file rather than sending it to anyone. Let's read that again.